Things have been better in Germany. No matter the field, whether football or the economy, a sense of leaden mediocrity and fatigue seems to have taken hold of the country. Now the federal government wants to reverse the trend and is trying to spread a message of fresh optimism. Just before the summer recess, the government passes its biggest reform packages to date. Pensions, tax relief, cutting red tape, labour market and healthcare reforms. Shortly afterward, it approves the 2027 federal budget with more than 200 billion euros in new debt. Is this a risky bet on an economic recovery? The Chancellor already has the weakest approval ratings ever recorded. At the same time, the right-wing populist AfD is leading in most opinion polls, increasing pressure on the government. We ask, recovery or ruin? Can Germany escape the crisis? Hello and welcome to The Point. My guests today. Max Hoffmann is head of DW's Berlin bureau focusing on German politics, but he also has extensive international experience, was previously based in Washington and Brussels. Wendelin van Bredow is senior Germany correspondent for the British magazine The Economist, based here in Berlin. Before that, she served as European business and finance correspondent. And Erik Fossing-Nielsen is an independent economist with more than 40 years of experience in global economic policy, macroeconomics and financial markets. He joins us from Denmark. Warm welcome to all of you. I want to start the show with something that happened recently in Germany. You might all remember Timmy the whale. And if you look at Germany right now, sort of not moving, not knowing where it wants to go, with all the appearance of death all around it, isn't that a fitting analogy? Max, what do you think?
You mean the humpback whale that got stranded in the Baltic Sea? Well, I think with Timmy, death was certain. That's not the case for Germany.
Okay, that's very brief. At least that is a bit of a relief. What do you think, Wendelin?
I agree, but it was also somehow typical for Germany. There was so much going on in the world, and the headlines were dominated by Timmy. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for the whale, but maybe Germany is still in quite a good state, considering that Timmy took so much of the attention of the entire people.
So the analogy doesn't really work.
Not quite.
Okay, I shall take it back then. But let's ask the economist here, Erik. Has Germany become mediocre in every field, whether it being football, where we had to go home very early on, or the economy?
No, not at all. I think I'm relatively optimistic. First of all, things are better in economic terms in Germany than in many other places. And so there's a degree of probably having maybe slipped in class a little bit in terms of moving along with the developments. So there is a degree of if not crisis, but issues that need to be addressed. I think the package you mentioned includes steps in the right direction. But in general, I'm not too worried. But I would love to tell you that the problems are bigger than they are, because that may help marginally to get the package and reforms through. But I don't think we are in a crisis situation, to be honest.
But do you think a step in the right direction
not in economics?
Do you think a step in the right direction is enough?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, in economics, it's we always talk about coming to a new stage, but there is not a well-defined place. I mean, let's face it, Germany has for many years, had a policy of encouraging, many ways, implicitly at least, an export-driven economy. So you cannot say, as many Germans say, that means that we are very competitive, and that's sort of been the feeling good about it. But it was done to a large extent at the expense of compressing domestic demand, so consumer spending and investment and all. public investment is far behind where they should be. That's a big part of the reason for the crisis we have to, or the troubles we have today. And part of the reason why AfD is doing quite well, because domestic demand, private consumption is not where it could have been. So there is actually a lot of scope to be addressed. So I don't think that we are looking at a fundamentally critical or very difficult situation, and it is a movement in the right direction. You mentioned one of the component pension reforms. We did this in Denmark quite some years ago, linking the pension age to life expectancy adjusted every 5 years. We do it a little bit more dramatically than the proposal in Germany, but it's a step in the right direction.
Okay, step in the right direction is good. Let's have a look at the bigger issues here, because several experts have said we do not have a cyclical problem, we have a structural problem. Let's have a look.
Friedrich Merz governs a country whose economy has stagnated for years. A country where people are increasingly dissatisfied with their own finances, the government, and the Chancellor. The CDU-CSU keeps slipping in the polls. It's now at 22%. The AfD is currently leading at 27%. Now the government is picking up the pace with a reform program designed to pull the country out of crisis. We are working to increase competition, enhance the flexibility of our businesses, reduce bureaucracy, preserve our welfare state, and ease the burden on workers and businesses by lowering taxes. Under the plans, a typical household would save around €600 a year. Wealthier people, meanwhile, would pay a little more in taxes. Is the Program for Growth and Jobs, as the government calls it, the long-awaited answer to Germany's problems?
Oh, that program is also known as the Summer of Reforms. Like we had the Autumn of Reforms last year, I believe, which mainly sort of just went away. Wendelin, how satisfied are you so far with this Summer of Reforms?
Well, it's much better than last year's Autumn of Reforms, which was basically a damp squid, as you said. So it's for sure a step in the right direction. And we are under the impression that finally the German government is getting its act together. It could have been even bolder, right, in terms of reducing bureaucracy, in terms of a more flexible labour market. But pension reform was a big thing, and they agreed so quickly. And in a way, for Germany, it's a pretty radical thing. You know, the pension age will slowly increase to 70. All these things that would have been impossible a few years ago were possible. So it's certainly very much a step in the right direction. But now it has to be implemented and followed through.
Much of the standstill that we've experienced recently, of course, I think we have to remind viewers that Germany is governed by a coalition government of a conservative party, the CDU, that's Friedrich Merz's party, and the Social Democrats, a junior partner in this coalition. The agreement that is now on the table, the reforms, was reached after a 7-hour coalition committee meeting. And it includes 34 measures. Is any of these measures the biggest one? Anything that stands out for you, Max?
Well, there's nothing really radical in there. And you know, what Eric said earlier today, I would say that's probably controversial at the moment here in Germany, because it's when you follow the press here and when you hear what's being talked about and everything, the perception in Germany is much less positive than what Eric said. It's kind of typical to a certain extent.
It's very German, isn't it?
It's pretty German. You could say very critical. It could also be that in every country, the country itself sees itself more critical than maybe people abroad, countries abroad do that. But yeah, Germans have a reputation of being very critical. What's different this time, if you talk about the perception, you know, when I talk to my contacts abroad, my friends abroad and everything, for the first time, they are saying things like, geez, it seems like Germany's really in trouble. Of course, they said that, especially after Germany got eliminated from the World Cup, but before that also. So there's that what you heard from Eric nowadays is the exception because it seems like the problems are just stacking up from all sides. You have Russia, which is a threat. You have China, which is strategically leveraging a lot of the things Germany was famous for in the past. You mentioned export, for example, against Germany. Also, you have rare minerals, critical minerals, rare earths and all that. That's part of it. And on top of that, you have the U.S., which no longer is a reliable partner. Right, so this is a mix that we've never had before, ever since World War II. That's very clear.
Yeah, I think.
And then you have artificial intelligence in the mix also, where Germany is not ahead. Yeah. So it's understandable that people here feel we are way behind the curve, and it's not certain we're going to make it out of this crisis situation. That's what most people here in Germany would say.
Yeah, when in your intro you said we have a structural problem, not a cyclical problem here in Germany, and I think that's right. The structural Germany used to rely on cheap energy from Russia, China as an export market, and not having to spend much on defense. All these things are not true anymore, and this has been true now for 5, 6, 7 years. And it hasn't really adapted to the new reality. Slowly, yes, it has started to adapt, but it's such a fundamental change. The entire German business model needs to be rethought, reinvented. That's not something you can do in a couple of years. It's a slow process, and the question is, are we reforming? Is Germany reforming enough and at a fast enough a pace?
And if I may add, I think the point here is what Germany's trying to do right now is reform a system that's been tried and true for the last decades. They're trying to fix the system. The question really is, with all those overwhelming changes, even the AI revolution, for example, is it time to change the system? Are you trying to fix something that's dead in the water already? Do you have to see the bigger picture? And that's why in Germany you hear a lot of criticism also of the reforms, at least parts of them, where people say this is not radical enough.
Eric, the part of all this reform is, of course, an enormous amount of debt. By 2030, Germany's debt could exceed 1 trillion. That's a trillion with a T. Is that justified, looking at the scale of the crisis, or is Germany, spending its future away?
I'm not worried about it. It all depends on what you spend it on. If you invest it, also for the government, it's good news, right? And you can discuss whether some of these investments are, how productive it is. How do you calculate an investment in a better Deutsche Bahn, for example, in terms of productivity? But it does help because people can move around more easily and more reliably and all the rest of it. So I'm not a fan of focusing on a euro debt number and say, oh, that's a lot of debt. Give you an example. The German government spends now about 2% of all tax revenue on interest payments. That may go up to 2.5%. America spends 20%. 20% of every tax dollar is spent on interest payments. France, 6.5%, right? So Germany is not facing a debt problem per se. Germany faces, as both Max and said, but I fundamentally agree with, there's a structural challenge because the world has changed. I go back to what I said before. Germany's economic model have been for too many years focused on exports and a too primitive, if I may say, focus on the budget deficit and the debt brake. And the result of that is that public investment across the board, and including in education, in schools, have been too little. Because you had to hit this damned, if I may say, budget deficit max. That's a too primitive way of running fiscal policy. So to the extent we open up that discussion, and there is public investment, and then there is a fundamental understanding that it is domestic demand that needs to pick up, exactly as was said. Trump is becoming a unfriendly trading partner. China is probably even more dangerous because of their implicit subsidies and managed exchange rate and stuff. So the whole point is exactly that you can't rely to the same extent on external demand. Germany today has still, last year, a current account surplus of 200 billion euros. That's savings, German savings, that is sent abroad. If you could just take half of that and invest in Germany, you are in a much better place. That requires, of course, that you liberalize the economy to extent so businesses have incentives to invest domestically. Part of that comes automatically because the previous idea of investing abroad for businesses is not so attractive anymore because the world is not so friendly anymore. But part of the reform that was done, I think is in the right direction in that sense. But as was said, it's not going to be fixed in a year or two, right? For sure.
But the largest item in the budget remains labour and social affairs, at just under 200 billion euros. But that's consumption, that is not infrastructure, is it? So can Germany get out of this rut, if you will, without cutting?
Yes, and I totally agree. And I think I totally agree with Eric that if it's spent on productive investment, if these debts and that's good. I mean, that's what Germany needs. But the problem is it might be consumed, by these very high social expenditure, and then we really do have a problem. And there's always talk. They always find a way of then renaming pots of expenditure, and then suddenly, they end up in the regular budget, but they were supposed to be, special funds. So I think it's very tempting for each government because, of course, they want to please their voters. But there's a big danger that it'll just be a lot will be wasted.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things here. The first one is what you mentioned. Germany has a lot of leeway compared to other countries. That's just a fact, especially if you look at countries that are pretty similar compared to France. Germany has a lot more leeway on defense spending, for example. They can have bigger defense contracts at the moment than France can. So that's a given. But that doesn't mean it's going to be politically feasible because overspending in Germany is a bad word. It still is, and a lot of political parties make political gains by pointing that out. And also, even if it seems clear from an economic standpoint what you need to do, where you need to invest politically, in the current climate, it is extremely hard to do because you have two political partners in the coalition that Gerhard mentioned earlier, the center-right and the Social Democrats, that traditionally used to be more in an opposing, it hasn't been the case for a decade or so, or even longer, but they have opposing programs, and they've always thrived when they were able to go at each other and not have to go with each other. That's not the case, but because of fear of what the AfD might do when they're in government or even getting more voters, they kind of try to stick together and try to find compromises. This seems to be working fairly well now after a long period where nothing happened. But still, it's not ideal if you're talking about more radical or more extensive reforms. And that's just the political reality that we have right now in this country.
Can I just come back to something that Eric said earlier, that Germany has to change its ways economically and not rely on what it could rely on for decades, like the car industry and heavy machinery and such. The high-tech industries and also the arms industries, weapon makers, can the defense and high-tech industries sort of step in, take over from the reliance of on the internal combustion engine, if you will?
I was at the NATO summit in Ankara, and of course, defense spending, huge topic this year. Big deal from TKMS, the German company with Norway, joint venture selling up to 12 submarines to the Canadians. That's a huge deal. Will it be able to, this kind of deal, would it be able to completely replace the German car industry? The only thing I really would like to say about this is don't write off the German car industry just yet. I was in Brazil last week with the German foreign minister. We visited a Volkswagen plant there. Volkswagen is still very big in that country because they run on biofuels, which is good for combustion engines. So German car industry is resilient. Of course, it's in a huge crisis, but my main message here is don't write it off completely just yet.
Well, that might be a bit early, but Wendelin, Volkswagen at the same time is cutting 100,000 jobs and intending to close 4 factories in Germany.
Exactly, and the supervisory board is talking about this today as we speak. It'll probably be watered down a little bit, this very radical plan, but still, this is a very painful big step for Volkswagen. As in terms of the arms industry replacing the car industry, we have to keep in mind that the arms industry is about 1/10 of the German car industry. So there's the German car, there's a big gap. And of course, as Max said, I think the car industry will need to reinvent itself. It will shrink, but of course it'll survive. Mm-hmm. The arms industry, however, really is a glimmer of hope in a fairly bleak industrial landscape. And you have some fantastic high-tech companies like Helsing, Renk. I mean, you have a few of those. And of course, you have the old big giants like Rheinmetall. And they, for them at the moment, it's boom time. And the question is more, can they actually deliver all these orders that they have in their backlog? So they have too many orders, too much work.
They can't cope.
And they can't cope, or they will find it difficult to cope within the deadlines, which were quite a tight framework of time.
Eric, where do you see strength for Germany? You've hinted upon it earlier in the program, but we've identified that the high-tech industries and defense industries could sort of cushion the blow a bit. What else do you see in the German economy?
Well, let me step back on the macro side and remind you that German productivity is not bad. In international comparisons, doing quite well. And in the tech area, the picture in Germany, like in all of Northern Europe, really, is that businesses are good at adapting the technology, including AI, into their processes and their businesses. We are not good in Europe at developing the first step of it, right? So we are very vulnerable to Elon Musk and Starlink and the political situation in America. So we have to think about the lack of resilience in this area. But on a macro level, I insist again on any measure that we economists look at. Productivity is fine, right? I mean, you can always dream of better, but it's fine. So then there is the issue, as you said, of sectors, and I completely share Max's view that there's a lot to be said on the defense industry. And while most of us probably don't really like to think about more arms production, and because this is a dirty business in a way, what they would be used at if they ever get used. The economic fact is that when you spend more on defense industries, productivity tends to go up because innovation goes up. There is, to put it very bluntly, there are few things that spurs innovation better than conflict. And I'm sorry to say it, right? But the drone industry in Ukraine is your perfect example, right? And Germany and many German companies are pretty close to this. So I think there is in that stage of development, there are a lot of areas, and Germany has still a world-class industrial sector, right? So whether it is in the auto industry, which I completely share the view that yes, there will be adjustment, but it is also the major German car industries and Siemens and others are those which invest most in research and development, have done over many years.
Eric,
and
I'd like to interrupt you here because we're coming to the end of the program. I would like to ask my closing question. If we come back to the program that the government has now initiated, could it mark the beginning of Germany's return as an industrial powerhouse, or will this massive public debt ultimately lead the country into decline, Wendelin?
No, the debt will not lead Germany into decline because Germany has much higher debt in the past. But as Eric said, compared to other countries, it's still relatively modest. Is the reform package really the big start of a new beginning? I think it's a bit too cautious for that, but it is at least sort of a step in the right direction. I don't think it's the big bang that we really wanted, but it's a small good bang in that sense. So
small bang.
Small bang.
Let me just bring in Eric briefly, please. What's your verdict finally on this reform package?
It's a positive step in the right direction. As an economist, I could always wish for more, but I'm not going to poo-poo as you said, 34 measures, which the vast majority go in the right direction, maybe a little bit slower than or more modestly than I would dream of, but the right direction.
Okay. What's your final verdict, and also who do you credit for it?
Well, I think it's, obviously a step in the right direction. Everybody agrees on that. It's not enough. That's the consensus here. But one thing I would like to add, you have to keep in mind, it's not just a political responsibility. You cannot always blame politics for it. It's also a responsibility from different companies, from the businesses, to innovate, to integrate, something the German car industry did not do enough. So just putting all the blame on politics is unfair in this case. So it's going to have to be a joint effort to really change and turn things around here.
Well, we have to leave it at that. Thank you very much to my whole panel. And to our viewers, I'd like to say we'd love to hear from you. Is Germany doomed beyond hope, or will Europe's biggest economy roar back to life quite soon? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Yes, we actually do read them and take them into consideration when we're planning our next shows. If you enjoyed our conversation today, hit like, subscribe, and share this video. I'm Gerhard Elfers in Berlin from me and the team. Thanks for watching.
Sure.